Hello everyone, my name is Mildred Whitlow. I'm 81 years old and I live in a creaky little house at the edge of Rosedale, a town so quiet you can hear the wind whisper between the trees. I haven't had a visitor in months. Not since my neighbor Beverly slipped and broke her hip and moved in with her daughter across state. My knees ache in the cold, and the heater groans louder than I do most mornings. But it's not the pain that weighs me down, it's the silence. The kind that fills the spaces where laughter used to live. I sit by the window with a shawl draped around my shoulders, the same shawl I crocheted the winter Lyle turned 10. He wanted a bike that year. I couldn't afford one, so I made him a scarf instead, sky blue, his favorite. I haven't seen that scarf in over 20 years. In my lap lies a photo. It's old, the edges frayed from years of being clutched in hope. Lyle with his gap-toothed smile and messy hair, grinning like the world couldn't touch him. Tessa, in a polka-dot dress, curls bouncing, holding my hand as if it was the safest place on earth. I remember that day like yesterday. It was the first Christmas after their parents, my sister Dolores and her husband Calvin, died in that terrible car crash. Lyle was 7, Tessa only 4. They had no one left. And I was already a widow, with nothing but my sewing and my tiny garden to keep me going. But I took them in. I didn't just take them in. I raised them, like my own. I gave them everything. My time, my love, my years. I worked 2 jobs, skipped dinners, sewed their costumes for school plays by hand. Tessa always wanted to be a butterfly, Lyle a firefighter. I was there for every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every late-night fever. I was the one who stood in the bleachers during Lyle's first high school baseball game. The one who danced with Tessa in the kitchen the day she got accepted into college. And now? They don't call. They don't write. They don't visit. Lyle lives somewhere in Phoenix, last I heard, from a friend of a friend. Tessa's in Minnesota. Got married to some real estate fella. I wasn't invited to the wedding. I found out through Facebook. An account I barely know how to use, but I keep it just in case they post something. Anything. Sometimes I wonder. Was my love not enough? Did I smother them? Was I too strict? Too soft? Or is it just that when people grow up, they forget the hands that held them up when they were too small to stand alone? I try not to cry anymore. The tears make my chest hurt, and I'm too old to sob the way I used to. But today the ache is too heavy. The photo shakes in my trembling fingers. My arthritis has gotten worse. I can barely grip a pen some mornings. I wanted to write them letters, pages and pages of the things I never said. But I couldn't. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I didn't think they'd care to read it. It's not just abandonment. It's the kind that strips you of your identity. The kind that makes you question if the decades you gave someone were ever really seen at all. And now I need help. Not money. Not handouts. Just company. A phone call. A face at the door. But they've vanished. And the silence, this silence, it's not just lonely. It's cruel. My hand tightens around the photo. For 35 years I built my life around them. And now they've left me to die alone. But I won't stay quiet anymore. I'm not done yet. They think I'm too old, too fragile, too far gone to matter. But they're about to learn something. Because I raised them like my own. And I still have a little fire left. And this time, I won't be the one forgotten. The knock came on a Sunday. Not the kind of knock you expect, soft, familiar, wrapped in love. No, this was sharp. Hesitant. Like someone who didn't want to be caught on the other side. I wasn't expecting anyone. Beverly was gone, and I hadn't ordered groceries. Truth be told, I barely made it out of bed that morning. My hip had flared up again, and the cold made it feel like someone was driving nails into my joints. I shuffled to the door in my robe, pressing my hand to the wall for balance. Every creak of the old floorboards reminded me how much time had passed since laughter filled this house. When I opened the door, it wasn't Lyle or Tessa. It was a boy. Maybe 19, maybe 20. Skinny as a twig, face pale, and eyes filled with the kind of fear that doesn't belong to youth. His hoodie was soaked from the drizzle outside, and he clutched a paper bag to his chest like it held gold. "Sorry, ma'am," he said, voice cracking. Are you Mrs. Whitlow?" I blinked, heart thumping. "Yes. Who are you?" He swallowed hard. "Name's Cody. I think you knew my grandmother. Janice." "Janice. Now that was a name I hadn't heard in over 20 years. We worked together at the diner back in '92. She used to bring in homemade fudge and tell stories about her cats like they were children. She'd passed away 10 years ago, but I never knew she had grandkids. Certainly not one standing on my porch with wet shoes and hollow eyes. Cody shifted uncomfortably. She told me, if I ever got real lost I should find you. Said you were the kindest woman she ever knew. That stopped me. Nobody had called me kind in a long time. Not since before Lyle and Tessa left. Not since I started fading into the background like wallpaper no one notices. I stepped aside. Come in before you catch pneumonia. He sat on the edge of the couch, dripping water onto the rug. I'd braided myself. The house suddenly felt smaller, warmer. Like someone had cracked open a window to the past. I don't want anything, he said quickly. I needed somewhere to go. His eyes flicked to the framed photo of Lyle and Tessa on the mantel. The one I kept dusted, hoping one day they'd walk in and see it, feel something. Anything. Are they your kids? Cody asked. I took a breath. They were. Still are, I suppose. My sisters. I raised them after she died. And they don't visit? I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. No. Not anymore. Cody didn't ask why. He just nodded like he understood. That kind of pain doesn't need much explaining when you've felt it yourself. He stayed for an hour. Then 2. I made him some tea and heated up leftover stew. He devoured it like he hadn't eaten in days. Maybe he hadn't. Turns out he'd been couch hopping after losing his job at a hardware store up north. No diploma. No family. Just a crumpled photo of his grandmother, and a name she told him to remember. Mine. I offered him the guest room. Told him it wasn't much, but it was warm and dry. He looked at me like I'd handed him the world. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, there was noise in the house. The sound of feet moving, a cabinet opening, a door gently closing. It made something stir in me. I'd spent so long aching for the past, for Lyle and Tessa to return. But maybe this was something new. Maybe kindness still had a place. Maybe I wasn't done mothering after all. But what I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that Cody's arrival wasn't just chance. It was the spark. The beginning of something bigger. Something that would shake Lyle and Tessa's world. Because the next morning I got a letter in the mail. And it wasn't from a stranger. It was from Tessa. I stared at the envelope as if it might catch fire. It was cream-colored. Thick paper. My name was written in looping cursive, Tessa's handwriting. I hadn't seen it in over a decade, but I'd recognize it anywhere. All those years of writing lunch notes and signing permission slips made it familiar in a way that felt like both a hug and a slap. Cody was still asleep in the guest room. The house was quiet, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock Marvin bought me for our 10th anniversary. It hadn't chimed in years, but I kept it wound, like some part of me hoped time could still be repaired. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm coffee and slowly opened the envelope. Dear Aunt June, I don't know how to start this or if I even have the right anymore. I know I haven't called, written, or visited, and I'm not going to pretend there's a good excuse. There isn't. I've made mistakes. I let time pass thinking it would get easier, thinking you'd always be there if I changed my mind. But I saw something last week that shattered me. An obituary. Not yours, but someone else's aunt. And it made me realize that people don't live forever, even the ones who gave everything to us. I want to see you. I don't know if I deserve to, but if you're willing, please write me back. Or call. I'll be in town next weekend for a wedding. I could come by. Or meet somewhere. Whatever you want. Love, Tessa. I sat still for a long time. My hands trembled, not from age this time, but from the weight of 100 unsaid things. Her words hung in the air, soft as a whisper, loud as a storm. She remembered. All this time I thought she'd moved on like I was a chapter she'd outgrown. But someone had shaken her heart. Maybe the silence had begun to echo. I traced my finger over the ink. Did I want to see her? Yes. And no. Because I wasn't the same woman who used to make her banana pancakes and sing along to the radio in the car. I wasn't the same Aunt June who showed up to every recital, who stitched her prom dress by hand when she couldn't afford the store-bought one. That woman had waited years at the window, phone clutched tight, wondering why love had an expiration date. But another part of me, the deeper part, whispered that this might be my chance. Not for forgiveness, maybe, but for truth. And I wasn't the only one changing. Cody came out mid-morning, rubbing his eyes and mumbling thanks for breakfast before he'd even sat down. He was still rough around the edges, still unsure of his place here. But something about him, his gentle way of asking if I needed help with the dishes, the way he lingered in the garden to touch the mint leaves, told me he wasn't just passing through. I got a letter, I said, not really knowing why I told him. He raised an eyebrow. From who? My niece. One of the two I raised. He didn't say anything, just nodded. Like he knew there was no right response to that. I didn't answer the letter right away. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I opened the cedar chest in my bedroom. The one Marvin built for me the year before he passed. It was filled with memories. Photos, drawings, old report cards, birthday cards with misspelled words. I found one from Tessa. She must have been 10. I love you more than sunshine. You make everything safe and warm. I cried. For the girl who wrote it. For the woman she became. For the years between us and the time I couldn't get back. But also for the sliver of hope. That weekend wasn't far away. And I had a decision to make. Would I open my door again? Or would I finally close it for good? That night I found Cody sitting on the porch, looking up at the stars. You think people can really change? I asked him. He didn't look away from the sky. I hope so. I'm betting my whole life on it. I didn't sleep much. Because in 5 days Tessa would be back in town. And I wasn't sure what was coming. But I was sure of this. I'd be ready. The morning air was unusually still. Not even the crows dared their usual cries. I stood in front of the mirror, fussing with a blouse I hadn't worn in years. Lavender cotton with tiny pearl buttons. I wasn't trying to impress her. I just wanted to feel like myself again. The woman who used to pack school lunches, who danced with Lyle and Tessa in the living room, who believed love was something that lasted. Cody had left early, saying he'd be back in the afternoon. He knew today mattered and gave me space without saying so. I made sweet tea, set out oatmeal raisin cookies I used to bake for Tessa when she came home crying from middle school. I didn't know if she'd show. Part of me believed she'd change her mind. The other part, well, that part kept glancing out the window every 5 minutes like a fool in a Hallmark movie. At 2:12 p.m., I saw a silver sedan pull up. I froze. The engine shut off. The door creaked open. And there she was. Tessa. She was thinner than I remembered. Her hair, once honey blonde, was darker now, maybe dyed, maybe just time doing what it does. She wore sunglasses too big for her face and clutched her purse like it was armor. I opened the door before she could knock. Neither of us said a word for a moment. Just stood there, 35 years of love and 10 years of silence wedged between us like a wall of glass. Then she said it. Aunt June. My breath caught. Not just from the words but from the way she said them. Like she was 10 again, asking if I could braid her hair for picture day.
Come inni, whispered.
She stepped inside slowly, her heels clicking against the old hardwood floors. I saw her eyes scan the living room. The same furniture. Same crocheted blanket over the couch. She looked like someone visiting a museum of her own childhood. I didn't think you'd actually invite me, she said softly. I didn't think you'd actually come, I replied. That broke the ice. She smiled. A real one. We sat at the kitchen table. She took the tea, barely touched the cookies. Her hands trembled. She wasn't wearing a wedding ring. How have you been? She asked. I gave her a look. How do you think? She looked down. I deserved that. I nodded. Yes, you did. Then I sighed. But you're here. Tessa swallowed hard. Tears gathering at the corners of her eyes. I thought about you a lot, you know. More than you'd believe. But every time I wanted to call, I remembered how long it had been. And the longer I waited, the more ashamed I felt. And then Lyle. She stopped. What about Lyle? He told me not to come. Said you wouldn't want to see us. That you were bitter. That you were bitter. I interrupted. Lyle said that. She nodded slowly. That boy. I whispered. He used to cry if I left the room for more than 5 minutes. And now he talks about me like I'm some ghost. I'm sorry, she said again. This time her voice broke. I was scared. Of what you'd say. Of what you'd see in me. I see the little girl I stayed up all night sewing a Halloween costume for, I said. The one who danced barefoot in the rain and made me promise to never stop loving her. Tessa started crying then. Real body-shaking sobs. The kind that come from a place so deep it doesn't know how to lie. And despite everything, I reached across the table and took her hand. Because even after all the silence, even after all the birthdays and Christmases spent alone, she was still mine. I don't expect you to forgive me today, she whispered. I already did, I said, squeezing her fingers gently. We sat like that for a while. Not talking. Just breathing. She stayed for 2 hours. Told me about her divorce, her job as an art therapist, her dog named Moxie. I didn't ask about Lyle again. That bridge could burn for all I cared. Before she left, she hugged me. Tight. Longer than necessary. Just like she used to. As she walked to her car, she turned back and asked, would it be okay if I came by next week? Maybe helped in the garden. I nodded. After she left, I stood in the doorway for a long time. The breeze picking up, rustling the curtains like a sigh. She came back. Not the same. But maybe, just maybe, still mine. It had rained the night before. Not the kind that floods, just a steady, healing rain, the kind that makes the earth smell like new beginnings. The soil in the garden was soft when I stepped out that morning, pulling on my faded gloves and straw hat. My knees ached, but that never stopped me. There was a peace in digging, turning the dirt, giving things another chance to grow. I hadn't touched the far corner of the garden in years. That's where Marvin planted the hydrangeas, and later where Lyle and Tessa buried their pet rabbit, Sugar, wrapped in one of my kitchen towels. They wept so hard that day, and I remember kneeling between them, letting them cry into my shoulders, promising that love never really dies, it just changes shape. That memory drifted back to me as I pulled weeds and shook out the roots. Funny how grief and joy live side by side like that. Tessa arrived just before 10. No makeup, hair tied back in jeans and a sweatshirt that said breathe. She looked younger than last week. Or maybe just more honest. Morning, Aunt June, she said, careful still with her words, like they were stepping stones on uncertain ground. Call me Mom, I said, not looking up from the dirt. She froze. When I turned to look, her eyes were wide. I mean it, I added, brushing my hands on my apron. I earned that title, didn't I? She nodded, eyes brimming. Yeah, you did. We got to work. She turned the compost while I cleared a patch for late tomatoes. We didn't talk much, but it was the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. A comfortable hush filled with shared understanding. The kind that only grows between people who've cried the same tears. She told me stories as we worked, about a young client at her clinic who painted with her toes, and about the time she tried to roast a chicken and nearly burned her apartment down. I laughed. A real one. The first in a long while. Midway through mulching the east bed, she suddenly asked, do you still have that quilt you made with our names on it? I looked at her. Of course. You think I'd tossed that out? I used to look for it every time I visited. I wanted to know you still thought of me like your child. I never stopped thinking of you that way, I said. Even when you disappeared. She nodded slowly. Lyle said you probably gave up on us. I let the silence settle like dust on old books. He lied to you, Tess, I said gently. He's been lying for years. She looked down. I know that now. We kept working. Near noon we broke for lunch on the porch. I poured sweet tea into the same mismatched glasses I'd used since the 90s. She sipped slowly, eyes scanning the trees. You know, she said. After Mom died, I don't remember much. Just you. Just this place. And even when I left, it still felt like home. Then why didn't you come back? I asked, not as an accusation, just a question long overdue. I was ashamed. I thought I'd hurt you beyond repair. I looked at her. You did, I said honestly. But I'm not broken. She smiled. Neither am I. We spent the afternoon planting new roses, my favorite. Blush pink heirlooms with petals that curl like secrets. Tessa picked up the rhythm quickly. Like her body remembered even if her heart had forgotten. At one point, she accidentally dropped a trowel on her foot and burst out laughing. It echoed across the fields, and I swear the wind leaned in to listen. Before she left, she kissed my cheek and whispered, "See you next Saturday, Mom." That word settled into my chest like warmth from a sunbeam. That night, I lit a candle in the window, not because I needed light, but because the house no longer felt dark. It was Monday morning when I found the letter. Tucked between grocery store flyers and a glossy home improvement catalog, it was the only thing without a barcode. The envelope was cream-colored and thick, addressed in neat, slanted handwriting I hadn't seen in years. Lyle. I knew it before I even opened it. I stood there on the porch steps, the morning sun warming my shoulders and birds singing in the cedar trees behind the house. But my hands shook. Not from age, this was something deeper. Something colder. The last time I'd heard from him was 4 years ago. A quick text. "Busy this month. Can't make it down. Hope you're well." No phone call. No visit. Just silence. Until now. I sat down in my rocker and unfolded the letter. Aunt June, no, I mean Mom. I guess I've always meant to say that, but it felt too late. I've been doing some thinking. A lot of it. Maybe more than I ever let myself do before. I know I haven't been a good son. I know I left you behind. But I'd like to talk. If you're willing. I'm going to be passing through on Friday. I'll stop by around 3. Love, Lyle. The words blurred in front of me. I read them again, slower this time. They didn't say much, not really. Just enough to stir up a storm in my chest. I wanted to be hopeful. I did. But hope was a dangerous thing when it came to Lyle. He was always charming. Always quick with a smile and slow with the truth. Even as a boy, he had a way of making you believe what you wanted to hear. He could make pain sound like poetry and abandonment feel like an accident. Still, I folded the letter gently and placed it in the drawer beside my chair, under the faded church bulletins and Marvin's old war medals. A sacred space for memories, both beautiful and bitter. The next few days crawled. I cleaned the house even though it didn't need it. Washed the curtains. Baked cinnamon bread just in case. I didn't tell Tessa. Not yet. I needed to face this part on my own. Friday came too fast and too slow all at once. By 2:50 I was pacing the porch. At 3:10 I was wringing my hands. By 3:30 I'd nearly convinced myself he wasn't coming. And then his car pulled up the long gravel drive. A sleek silver sedan, not at all the beat-up truck he used to drive. He stepped out in slacks and a pressed shirt, holding something small in his hand. A gift bag. The kind people bring to funerals when they don't know what else to offer. "Mom," he said, his voice soft. I looked at him. Older now. Lines around his eyes. But the same Lyle underneath. The same cautious smile. The same eyes that used to look at me like I hung the moon, back when he needed someone to believe in him. "I didn't think you'd come," I said. "I almost didn't," he admitted. "But I kept thinking about you. About this place." He looked around the porch, his eyes lingering on the wind chimes, the rocking chairs, the potted geraniums I'd just replanted. "This place raised me," he said. "You raised me. And I left." I nodded slowly. He handed me the gift bag. Inside was a candle, lavender vanilla, my favorite, and a handwritten note. Just one sentence. "I remember." I swallowed hard. We sat on the porch side by side, saying little for a long time. He told me about his new job in Colorado, his wife, whom I'd never met, and the son I didn't even know he had. "You have a grandson?" I asked, blinking. "Yeah," he said, almost shy. "His name's Caleb. He's 6. That hurt more than I expected. Not because he hadn't told me, but because I hadn't been part of it. Not the pregnancy, not the birth, not the birthday parties. Not one bedtime story, not one scraped knee. "Why now, Lyle?" I finally asked. "Why come back after all this time?" He sighed. "Because I saw an old photo of us in the attic," he said. "You were holding me after my first baseball game, and I was crying because I struck out. And I remembered how you looked at me. Like I mattered even when I failed." I bit my lip. "You always mattered," I said. "Even when you forgot me." He reached for my hand. "I didn't forget. I just buried it. I buried everything. But I don't want to anymore." I didn't answer right away. Part of me wanted to pull away, to remind him that remembering now doesn't undo the forgetting then. But another part, quieter, softer, wanted to believe this was a beginning, not a trick. I let him hold my hand, just for a moment, and in that moment something shifted. Not forgiven, not forgotten, but maybe unfrozen. As he left, he turned and asked, "Would it be okay if I brought Caleb next time?" I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. And as his car disappeared down the gravel path, I whispered to the wind, "Let's see if roots can grow again." The next week passed in a strange fog of anticipation. I kept glancing at the little wooden table in the kitchen. The one Marvin built back in '68. It only had 2 chairs for years. But now, for the first time in decades, I pulled out a third. Just in case. Every time I passed that table, I imagined a small boy's legs swinging under it. I imagined sticky fingers grabbing biscuits, milk spilling in little puddles. I imagined laughter. But I reminded myself, imagination was dangerous. Especially for old women who'd known too many goodbyes. Still, I baked more than I needed. I laid out Lyle's old baseball glove on the counter. Not to guilt him, just to remember what was. What maybe still could be. On Thursday afternoon, the phone rang. "Hi, Mom." It was Lyle, his voice lower than last time. My heart raced. "Yes." "Listen," he said. "I know I said I'd bring Caleb this weekend. But Tessa found out I visited. She's upset." I stiffened. Of course she was. Tessa had always been different. Quieter, harder to read. As a girl, she clung to me like a shadow. As a teen, she built a wall I couldn't climb. I loved her just the same, but that love never got returned with the same light. "What did she say?" I asked. "She thinks I'm wasting time. That you don't deserve it." I swallowed the bitterness. "And what do you think?" There was a pause. "I think she's hurt in her own way," he finally said. "But I also think she's wrong. So Caleb and I will be there Sunday. Just us." When Sunday came, I woke up before dawn. The biscuits were in the oven by 6. The quilt I made for Lyle as a boy was folded neatly on the couch. I even took Marvin's old rocking chair out to the porch and dusted it clean. At 2:47, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I didn't rush. I just waited. And when I opened the door, there he was. Lyle. And beside him, a little boy with golden curls, a crooked smile, and the same dimple Marvin once had. "Caleb," Lyle said gently, "this is your Grandma June." The boy blinked up at me. "You're the one who made Daddy's quilt?" I smiled. "That's me." And just like that, the third chair at the table had purpose again. Caleb talked the entire lunch, about bugs, outer space, and how he hated carrots. Lyle watched him with a tenderness I'd never seen in him before. I watched them both, my chest full of something warm and aching. After lunch, we played Go Fish on the rug. Caleb kept losing and giggling about it. Lyle leaned over and whispered, "He's never had a grandparent like this. Like you." I almost didn't know what to say. But when Caleb hugged me goodbye, his tiny arms around my waist, his breath warm against my apron, I knew this wasn't just a visit. It was a planting. A root. As they drove away, I stood in the doorway and didn't cry. For once I didn't cry. Because sometimes love returns, not with grand apologies, but in small hands and second chances. But I also knew the peace wouldn't last. Tessa had never stayed silent for long. And I could feel her storm brewing on the edge of everything I'd just started to rebuild. 3 days after Lyle's visit, the phone rang again. I didn't answer. Something in my bones told me who it was. And I wasn't ready to hear it. Not yet. I let the machine take it. Beep. "June. It's Tessa." Her voice was clipped, controlled. Like she was holding back a flood behind tight lips. "I heard Lyle brought Caleb to see you. You always knew how to twist him. How to make him feel guilty." "I'm not surprised." I closed my eyes. Her tone, sharp, cold, was a knife I'd known for years. And still, it sliced clean through. "You weren't his real mother, June. You weren't mine either. You just filled the gap. A necessary stand-in. Don't confuse that with being family." Click. The silence that followed was worse than the message. I sat there on the old rocker, listening to the wind hit the side of the house, the ticking of the clock louder than ever. I thought back to the first time I braided Tessa's hair, How she cried because her real mama used to do it differently. How she sat in my lap afterward and whispered, "Can I still call you Auntie, even though you're my new mama?" I told her she could call me whatever she wanted, as long as she knew I'd always be there. I was. But she wasn't now. The next morning, I took a walk down to the post office. Martha, the clerk, handed me a manila envelope. No return address, just my name, typed in cold. Inside, legal papers. A petition. Tessa was requesting control over my estate, claiming I wasn't mentally sound, claiming I needed to be placed in a care facility, claiming I was a danger to myself. I sat on the bench outside and read every word twice. My hands didn't tremble, but my heart did. All those years. All the scrapes I bandaged. The dinners I skipped so they could eat better. The nights I sat up coughing just to sew a little longer for an extra $1. They were erased. Rewritten. Like I'd never been more than a placeholder. But I wasn't going to be erased. Not quietly. That evening I pulled out the dusty box under the bed. Letters from Marvin, birth certificates, adoption papers, even a will I never told them about. I started making calls. To an attorney. To a notary. To Lyle. I was done waiting. I was done being the silent saint who took every hit with a bowed head. If Tessa wanted to come for me, she'd better come prepared. Because I wasn't just a lonely old woman anymore. I was June Elaine Mathers, and I was taking my story back. The next morning I put on my nicest coat, the navy one Marvin bought me for our 25th anniversary, and walked into town with my head high. Everyone thinks small-town women don't fight back. They think we just sit and knit and fade into the background. But they forget we've seen more winters than they've seen summers. And we've survived every storm. I stepped into the office of Evelyn Clark, attorney at law. She'd been in Tessa's class back in high school. Smart girl, quiet, respectful. She remembered me right away. "Mrs. Mathers," she said, standing up from her desk. "What can I help you with?" I handed her the envelope and my own folder of documents. "My adopted daughter wants to declare me unfit and take my home. I need to show her I'm not some weak old woman she can bulldoze." Evelyn flipped through the pages carefully. Her eyes narrowed at the lies in Tessa's petition. "You're sharp as a tack," she said. "And you've got proof of everything, legal adoption, medical records, even your financials. She won't have a leg to stand on." I nodded. "Still, I want to go a step further. I want to rewrite my will." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "Cut them out." "Not entirely," I said. "But they won't get the house. Or the land. Or the rights to anything I built with my 2 hands. I pulled out an old photo, me, Lyle, and Tessa, standing by the porch the day we finished repainting it. They were barely teenagers. Their grins were wide, their faces smudged with paint. "I gave them everything," I whispered. "I'm not taking revenge. I'm just reclaiming what's left of me." Evelyn nodded. "You're doing the right thing." Later that afternoon, I stopped by the nursing home. Not to check in, but to visit Alma, an old friend I hadn't seen in years. She was sitting by the window, wrapped in a shawl, watching birds flit across the lawn. "June," she blinked. "Well, I'll be. You're still on your feet." I laughed and squeezed her hand. Still got fight in me. We sat and talked for hours. About loss. About motherhood. About what it feels like to give and end up empty. Before I left, she looked me straight in the eyes. "They don't know what they threw away," she said. "But one day they will. And by then they won't deserve you anymore." Her words stayed with me. That evening Lyle called again. "Mom," he said, voice low. "Tessa's serious about the petition. She's meeting with another lawyer next week." "Let her," I said. "She'll be surprised." A long pause. "I never wanted this," he said. I got busy. I thought you were okay." "I wasn't," I said. "But I am now." Before hanging up, I told him something else. "I've got a few things left to do before my time is up. And none of them involve begging for scraps of love." Because I had a plan. The morning of the hearing arrived with the sun pouring through my kitchen window. I was up before the rooster crowed, wearing the same pearl earrings I wore when I adopted Lyle and Tessa all those years ago. My hand shook only slightly as I sipped my coffee, black and strong. Evelyn picked me up herself. She had a calm confidence about her that settled my nerves. Outside the courthouse, the small-town gossip mill buzzed. I saw familiar faces. Old neighbors, choir friends, even the grocer who used to sneak Tessa lollipops. They'd heard bits and pieces. Some looked at me with pity, some with pride. Tessa stood on the other side of the courtroom, arms folded, face pinched. Her lawyer looked like he hadn't slept. Lyle sat 2 rows behind her, his head bowed, avoiding my eyes. The judge, an older woman with soft eyes but a firm voice, called us to order. Evelyn stood and presented everything. Legal documents of adoption, bank records, my clean medical history, statements from my doctor, even photos over the years showing a lifetime of care. She read a letter I had written, trembling slightly. I gave up my dreams to raise children who were not born of me, but born into my heart. I traded sleep for comfort, wants for needs, loneliness for purpose. I did not ask for thanks. But I will not accept being discarded like a forgotten shoe. Tessa's lawyer attempted a rebuttal, citing declining faculties and emotional instability, but it all fell flat. When the judge ruled in my favor, there was no applause, just silence, and then a sigh, almost like the walls themselves exhaled relief. I stood slowly. I looked at Tessa and Lyle, grown adults I once sang to sleep. For a moment, I thought maybe they'd say something. Maybe they'd run up and hug me, say they were sorry, say they remembered. But they didn't. They left first, walking past me without a word. Outside, the wind was brisk. Evelyn touched my arm gently. "You won, June." "No," I said, looking up at the sky. "I reclaimed." That spring I turned 82. I sold the house and moved into a small cottage on the edge of town, near a community garden that welcomed volunteers of all ages. The land from the farm? I donated it. Built a learning center in Marvin's name where kids could plant, read, and learn about the soil. They called me Miss June and asked for stories every Saturday under the sycamore tree. Lau wrote once. Just a card. No return address. It said, "I remember the pancakes. I'm sorry." Tessa never reached out, but I stopped waiting. I bloomed again, not because they came back, but because I found myself again in the quiet, in the soil, in the giggle of a child holding a worm for the first time. And when people asked if I had any children, I smiled and said, I had 2. I raised them like my own. They left me to die alone. But I chose to live instead. Television, subscribe for more heartfelt stories like this one. Because sometimes healing begins with a story. Speech balloon, comment below if this story touched you. Share it with someone who might need to be reminded.